It's Franklin. Troy Franklin will take it to the house. Touchdown, Ducks. 50 yards.
Nix drops back underneath. Touchdown, Ducks. Wow. For the lead. Oh, off the upright and good. He kissed it in.
It's time to talk some West Coast Pac-12 football once again. The Oregon Ducks. And anytime we talk Oregon Ducks football, of course, that means it's Rob Mosley who makes the appearance, the editor of GoDucks.com, and that is the official website for Oregon athletics. And we can't go to a better source. Thanks for doing this again, Rob.
Yeah, good to see you. Happy to do it. Ready for another football season.
Absolutely. So let's hope that we can keep doing this for as long as possible. That's for sure, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I got to start off with the biggest question and the biggest news, or find out what's the pulse of the environment there in Oregon with the move that's coming soon to the Big Ten, because the big deal there is more travel, more money. But no more rivalry with Oregon State. Is that possible?
Yeah, I hope that's not the case. And I do think that every effort will be made to try to play that game in as many sports as possible, as often as possible. It's hard to imagine that those games just going away. Obviously, there's some hard feelings. Out here on the West Coast, a decision like this isn't made in a vacuum, and it's not just about Oregon and the positives of going to the Big Ten, but yeah, there are some different new challenges that arise from that, and then obviously some raw emotions with this being the last year in the Pac-12 as we know it, and it's 100 years of tradition And the league has evolved over those years, so it's not like it's just been one thing that's suddenly coming to a halt. Kind of, sort of, change has been a constant, relatively speaking, but this is obviously pretty significant. So yeah, there's a lot of questions like that remain, and hopefully, maybe when some feelings are just soothed by the passages of time, it'll be easier to kind of have some discussions concretely about kind of what that could look like. Because I think, for fans out here, they want to see Oregon and Oregon State play. And I think from Oregon's end, at least speaking on behalf of the Ducks, that desire certainly remains.
And that's, look, even fans here on the East Coast that are diehard college football fans don't want to see these rivalries gone. It's the tradition is everything. As far as we're all concerned as college football fans, I'm sure you agree, of course, with that. And that's why, look, Notre Dame, they play USC every year. And I know they're an independent, but, you get these kind of, Georgia plays Georgia Tech at the end, not in the same conference at the end of the year. So Florida State, end of the year. So if these guys can do it, no reason that Oregon or Oregon State can't keep the Civil War at the end of the season.
Yeah, again, I think from Oregon's end, it'd be sure to be nice to keep that game, that tradition alive, because it's one of the longest standing rivalries in all of college athletics. I think in men's basketball, it might be the most played series in NCAA history. So sure it'd be nice to keep that going.
Yeah, and it's also a good time to keep it going, because now Oregon, of course, has been going pretty well now for a while, as from my point of view, from our point of view, since Chip Kelly. Has that pretty much been the case? Chip was the one that kind of resurrected, or was it just before Chip?
You're talking about Oregon kind of having the upper hand in over Oregon State. I think Rich Brooks had a really, really good record against Oregon State, so it goes back farther than that. Like it tends to happen in rivalries. It kind of ebbs and flows. One side will have a long run, and another side will have a long run. This rivalry is pretty competitive. Rich Brooks, it was really one-sided.
Oh, was it?
during
Okay.
his tenure here. It's pretty. It's been even more even since then. But yeah, just some classic battles, and it's the scary thing I think from Oregon's perspective is, I mean there's been some years for Oregon State where maybe they were having some lean years, and
Yes.
that game meant everything to them. And there were some years like in the '80s when both programs are going through some lean years when it meant everything. It was basically each team Super Bowl. You might go 2-9, but if you beat Oregon State,
Yeah.
at least you finished on a good note. So, I think if you're Oregon, the danger is, okay, you've got all these new traditions, these new rivals, and a new league, and you're kind of focused on that, and suddenly this game that means everything to Oregon State, and maybe even more to show Oregon that the Ducks made the wrong decision leaving
That's true.
the Pac-12.
Yeah.
It could be even more of a dangerous game for the Ducks that way. But that's the sort of thing that makes rivalry games like that so flavorful and so fun. So.
And it is good that Oregon State is playing as good as I remember them, and not a surprise.
No doubt.
Kind of saw this coming with Jonathan Smith. I've been talking him up the past couple of years, and now it's everybody's seeing it.
Yeah, no, he's a really high quality coach. I mean, I will argue till I'm blue in the face. I'm happy to do so here now with you that if Bo Nix is healthy at the end of the last season, that Oregon State game goes a different way, and the Washington game goes a different way, and Oregon makes the playoff if Bo doesn't hurt his ankle at the end of that Washington game. But it happened, and Washington took advantage, and Oregon State took advantage, and that's what you got to do when you have an opportunity like that. So credit to them for doing that. But I think there's no doubt that they're in a good place. They got to feel. From their perspective, you got a guy who played for you, and now has turned himself into an elite coach, and he's doing it at his alma mater. I mean, that's awesome.
Yep.
We've got obviously not football, but we've got I think at least 3 head coaches, definitely 3 on the women's side in our department that are alums of the programs that they're now coaching, and it's awesome.
Yeah,
it's just a different kind of different kind of investment that they have in their program. So Oregon State is enjoying that right now, and I'm sure loving it.
Especially when the program is successful. That's even better.
Right.
I'm going to post up the current depth chart as we go over the offense into defense for Oregon from ourlads.com. And let's start at quarterback. You just mentioned Bo Nix. And this is one of the reasons why I really do, as a fan, I really love the transfer portal. Now, yes, I agree that things need to be tightened up, so to speak, and everybody knows that. But fact is, this allows someone like Bo Nix, who just, for whatever reason, it just wasn't working out where he was. And I think most people just felt, top recruit, he's you can call him like a bust. Yeah, it's not going to work. And then he goes and finds a new home in Oregon, and now everything about him and why people thought that he could be a really good quarterback at this level came to fruition last year. And so if he can stay healthy, who knows what he could do this year, including potentially put himself in the running for the Heisman.
Yeah, Bodacious is what they're calling him on the billboard that just went up in New York City to promote his to promote Bo and promote the season he's about to have, and the Heisman push is underway. But yeah, he's a heck of a player. I mean, he just the difference between last year and this year has been interesting because last year he came in and he was very intent on not just walking in and acting like the starting job was his. I mean, common sense said that, it was probably going to be his. But he was very methodical about wanting to establish himself in the quarterback room with the rest of his teammates, with the coaching staff and everything. And so, there was very little sense outwardly from him until you got to September that, all right, you're the man, this is your team, act like it. Now it's been different. I mean, he just carries himself as the guy who knows that he's, everyone is looking to him and he's got to set the tone. And so the way teammates talk about his preparation and just how locked in he is on the new offensive coordinator, Will Stein's system and what he wants to do and terminology and all that, like he knows this offense inside and out in a way that nobody else on the team does, and that's what you need from your quarterback.
Absolutely.
And obviously, going back to his Auburn days, he's a playmaker. He's a guy who, one of his best skills is that when things break down, he can make something happen. Now, and he's gotten himself in trouble in the past trying to do that. But I think as he's matured, he's found a way to still take advantage of some of those skills without making a big mistake as often. And so it's kind of the best of both worlds there. And it's just fun to watch the way he goes about his business. I said often at times, Marcus Mariota's junior year, Justin Herbert's senior year, like it was like watching a pro guy play with a bunch of college players. I'm not seeing that. I'm not saying Bo's there at the level of those two guys just yet, right there in his season. But I think he's trending that way. That by the time you get to November, December, if he has the kind of season that folks are thinking he could, it could start to feel like that. That this guy's just in such command of the system and in such a command of himself and his team that it's gonna feel like a guy just operating at a different level.
Yeah, and if you can turn into anywhere near the level of those guys this season, then Oregon is going to have a great year, or you would imagine that they would. You mentioned Stein, the new offensive coordinator. So is anything changing dramatically on offense, or what specifically, if not dramatically, are there some specific details that are going to be a little bit different?
Not that I can tell so far. I mean, he's been pretty explicit since he got here of saying, hey, what they did last year worked with the pieces they had in place. And yeah, there are some different pieces, but when you have Bo Nix back, when you have Bucky Irving and Noah Whittington back, Troy Franklin back, there's Terrence Ferguson, the tight end. I mean, a lot of the major weapons are the same. And so I think, he's a guy, I think any good offensive coordinator is going to maximize the pieces he has rather than try to fit,
yes, agreed.
Square pegs in round holes, any of that. And so I think, he's been pretty explicit about saying, hey, what they did worked. So a lot of stuff's going to probably look pretty familiar. So I think what'll be interesting is, say 2-3 years down the road, if you have if the strengths of the personnel groups look dramatically different, is he going to look to do dramatically different things? Our tight ends coach was talking just the other day, Drew Maringer, about how at UTSA they had a really, really strong deep receiver group. And so they did some different things there than they're probably going to do here, where this running back room is so deep. And, Ferguson at tight end is so talented. And you've got a guy in Bo that can really, move the ball himself with his feet, do different things that way. So I don't think, I didn't watch a ton of UTSA last year, but it sounds like, if you're a UTSA fan and you watch this offense, it might look different than what you saw Stein doing there the last year.
All right. Before we go into some of these other players, I do, since I asked you about a coach, I do want to ask you about Dan Lanning's first season. Everybody knew about, okay, great recruiter. And in college football, that is huge. If you're a great recruiter, and they don't know what kind of a head coach you could be, they're willing to risk it. And that's sometimes you get a good one, and then sometimes he just doesn't know what he's doing. It's way over his head, and you got to go find someone else. How did Lanning handle himself the first year, and what do you think that he feels he even has to do to become a better head coach?
I mean, on a personal level, it's very strange to see someone who's younger than I am carrying himself the way he does. I mean, having achieved the level of success he has and kind of climbed to near the top of the coaching ranks already at a young age, but then just the way he carries himself and the way he's able to he has this youthful exuberance, and he can sing along to certain songs at practice that I've never heard, communicate with guys on a certain level, but then also just exude, being in command. And, I think as a program manager, I mean, he really, he has an impressive bearing about him that kind of belies his age. Again, I think for Oregon fans, when you lose to your top two rivals, that didn't sit real well.
Sure.
Late last season, I think everybody knew you're going into a buzzsaw at Georgia to open the year, and it kind of worked out how it might have. maybe a little worse than it might have been, based on just the way the game played out. But, that was a tough situation to be going into first game. But then things really got rolling. And then you lose to your two rivals when there's a playoff berth potentially on the line. That hurts. And I think in the moment there were some decisions made that people felt like, maybe didn't reflect as highly on Coach Lanning as an in-game coach. But I think as time passed, again, I'll tell anybody who's willing to listen, if Bo Nix is healthy, I mean, Ducks are just running it down Washington's throats.
Sure.
All they need to do is just keep running the ball, keep milking the clock, score at the end of that game, and that game's over.
Yeah.
And you beat the Huskies. Instead, Bo gets hurt. He has to come out. The momentum shifts completely. Washington comes back and wins that game. Somehow finds a way to gut out a win over Utah. I'm still not sure how that happened because the kid was basically immobile. And then, go to Oregon State. You're on the road, tough environment. Again, it's a game that means everything to Oregon State. It meant everything to Oregon at that point too, given it was the last regular season game. But again, Bo's playing hurt, and if he hadn't been, I think that game is completely different. But it was what it was, and some special teams breakdowns and some other things you look at and say, hey, that cost you the game. And again, I think even Oregon fans late last season were going, I'm not sure about Coach Lanning. There's some decisions in those games that where Oregon might have pulled it out. But I think everybody's come to terms with the fact that if your quarterback gets hurt, you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
Potentially you can push some buttons to get you out of that hole, but that's a tough challenge for any program. So, I think Oregon fans are really, really happy. An extension was announced for him with a raise this offseason, and I saw very little from Oregon fans other than glad to lock this guy up. This is the guy we want at the helm of this program, because you've got a guy who I think the recruiting that Mario Cristobal did here, our fans really came to respect, enjoy, appreciate. And so to have a guy that's recruiting kind of at that level, and then, potentially can just raise level play in terms of results is most welcome.
Yeah, because as you mentioned, of course, his age, he's so young and he's had so much success. And you just feel, if you're a fan, or at least you would think if you're a fan, he's really young. He's going to just, he'll learn on the job. He'll get better. Everybody should when you get experience and all that other stuff. And if he keeps recruiting the way he's going to recruit, then why can't we have someone here for the next 10 or 15 years? I mean, that's what college football is about. It is about, again, legacy and so forth. If you find a head coach, and you can, especially now with the transition of the Big Ten, where else is Lanning going to go to step up a ladder? The NFL. So this should be as high as he would want to get to, I would imagine, if he has a lot of success. So as long as he stays in college football, hey, he might be here a long time. And I think that's a great, thing to envision if you're an Oregon fan.
No doubt. I mean, you can't be blind to the fact that there might be a couple of jobs in the SEC that if they ever came open and available, he might think about. But, you think about, too, he's got a wife and he's got 3 young boys that are all kind of in the prime of kind of their adolescence. And, like any parent, I think he is asking himself, do I want to move them around a bunch more? I mean, he had to move around quite a bit the last decade or so to position himself where he's at now. The question becomes, is Eugene a place where you want to put down roots and could see yourself raising your family and raising your boys? And I think, so far it seems like he says yes to those questions. So again, another thing that's kind of most welcome to the ears of Oregon fans.
Yeah. All right. So let's take a look at the rest of the offense. And look over the depth chart. Boy, we have a color-coded system here, and the orange represents new players, freshmen or transfers, and there's a lot of orange here, especially with the transfer portal. So let's talk on offense. You mentioned Bucky Irving in the backfield, and the backfield is going to be pretty deep, isn't it? And Irving, he's clearly the number one guy, right?
I don't know if that's the case. I mean, he definitely was. He was definitely the guy last year in terms of huge game in that Holiday Bowl. Which that game ending the way it did just totally reframed the way I think this offseason felt for Oregon. If you lost 3 of your last 4,
Yeah.
that was going to be really tough. But to come back and come from behind and win that game in dramatic fashion, I kind of really reframed just kind of how this offense felt for the program, for its fans, for everyone. And Bucky that was his best game of the year. A couple touchdowns. Got himself to 1,000 yards for a season. So yeah, what he's done, he's proven is impressive. But the speed that Noah Whittington brings is really, really elite. And they've got a kid in Jordan James who was kind of the short yardage guy last year, who I think they feel like can be a great every down back too, if he's got given those opportunities too. So,
Okay.
Carlos Lachlan, that position coach, is all about kind of tough love. And he's not gonna just give you your laurels. You got to earn them, regardless of what you did the year before. So, I think this really could be a situation where you see a lot of guys get a lot of carries, and that even though you might look at stats from last year and say Bucky's the guy, if you look at stats game to game this year, you might not come away thinking that same thing.
Okay.
He's obviously immensely talented, but I think they feel like they got some guys. Some other guys who can carry the load too, so they don't need to just designate a guy.
Okay. At receiver, now you mentioned tight end, Ferguson. So you seem to you popped up his name a couple times. You think he's got the opportunity to even make a bigger presence this season? He was 4th team last year, maybe. I forget. Maybe he could be 1st team this year.
I mean, he was the kind of the red zone threat in the passing game last year. 5 touchdowns.
Okay.
But he's a guy who can really run too, and I just think that if he gets more chances in the open field, he could really put up some big numbers. And I just think he's had a chance to work a lot with Bo now at this point. Bo and Troy Franklin obviously really quickly developed chemistry last year, but Terrence Ferguson's had a chance to build up his chemistry more. He was banged up at the end of spring ball, and has kind of been working his way back over the course of the summer. But I just think he's just a really talented kid, and definitely could be a guy who has a big year.
Okay, and you take a look at Franklin. He's the number 1 guy, but a couple transfers come in, especially the kid from Troy. Tez Johnson. So do you think he's the guy that could really help make things even more dangerous in the passing game? Because Franklin, of course, is going to get a lot of the attention. So how is this receiver unit, especially at wide receiver, looking compared to last season?
Yeah, I think, Chase Cota, and he's the guy who caught the game-winning touchdown in the bowl game, really ended up being reliable. He's a guy I think Knicks looked to when he was in trouble last year. I think Tez Johnson is going to be that guy this year. I mean, they have a relationship that goes back years and years and years off the field, as well as on the field. So, I think that's kind of a safety valve for both. So I wouldn't be shocked if Tez Johnson at the end of the year ends up leading this team in catches. I don't think that would be shocking. Troy Franklin, though, is just a guy that can do it all. I think the only question is kind of to your point, how much attention does he get? But he's a guy who can beat double coverage. He can go up and get a 50-50 ball. He can outrun somebody down the field. He can make a tough grab in traffic. He's just a really, really elite receiver. But there's some other new faces too. Trayshawn Holden is a big physical target. Gary Bryant's another guy kind of in the Tez Johnson mold, who's a little smaller, really quick, can go catch the ball. So yeah, it's going to be some new faces there. And Chris Hudson's a guy who's back in that mix too, and he's kind of in that mold of the smaller, quicker, faster guy. So between the big frames of guys like Franklin and Holden, and then guys like Hudson and Bryant and Johnson, you got some smaller, quicker guys. So some different body types in that group, but a lot of different weapons too. So it's gonna be really interesting to see kind of what the starting group looks like, what the regular playing rotation looks like. Kyler Casper's a young guy, another bigger guy who I think they're really hopeful can develop into an impact player for this group too.
I got to ask you because I've seen so many talented receivers at Oregon over the years, guys that put up good numbers and they seem to go to the NFL and I just don't see it. I don't see that transition going well, is there, and that happens in all college football. I'm no reason to point out Oregon, but is there a receiver on this unit, whether it's Tez Johnson or Troy Franklin, that you believe can? And again, I know you're not an NFL scout, but do
Yeah.
you see anything different from these guys, from the other guys, or are these, nothing wrong with these guys being excellent college players? I'm
Yeah.
not saying that, but you see anything different?
Jurion Dickey is a guy who's a true freshman this year,
Oh.
who I think he's wearing number 99 as a wide receiver, so it'll
Okay.
be easy to spot
There you
if you're
go.
watching games. That's a guy who combines kind of the really big physical body type that I think you see thrive in the NFL with really elite athleticism.
Okay.
I think if you look at this group, there might be, you've got a guy who like Franklin, who's tall and rangy and athletic, but not the most stout guy. You've got a guy in Trayshawn Holden who's tall and physical and big, but I'm not sure if he's the most explosive guy on the roster. You've got a guy like Tez Johnson, who is one of the most explosive guys on the roster, but a smaller guy.
Yep.
I think potentially Jurion Dickey could be a guy who combines a lot of that.
Okay. That's a good
we'll
one.
see. I mean,
Okay.
he's a really young guy and, unproven at the college level, much less, as a potential prospect for the next level. So I don't want to put, too much pressure on
Sure.
him. But, if you're just thinking about kind of the skill sets that, profile at the next level,
Yeah.
he might be a guy who kind of checks a lot of boxes in that way.
Was he a 5 or a 4-star?
I don't know.
Okay.
I got to be honest. I don't
You don't
follow
get into
recruiting
that
close
thing,
enough
yeah.
to memorize all that
I
stuff.
interview
Yeah.
a lot of guys from Rivals and so forth, and
Sure,
it's like,
yeah.
so I'm used to that. But okay, let's offensive line. And speaking of transfers, so do you
Yeah.
think there's going to be 2 to maybe 3 transfers that could end up starting or at least getting significant playing time?
Sure, potentially. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really a group. Leek Terry is the new kind of old face there as the position coach.
Okay.
He had been an assistant on the staff and now came back to be the lead offensive line coach this year. So, I think he's getting a sense for kind of all these different guys, and he's really working big on working a lot of different groups together. But yeah, I think you look at like Johnny Cornelius. He's a really high level tackle, and there's a need there. Nishad Strother, Junior Angilau, or, interior linemen who could be factors there in the rotation for sure. How exactly they're all going to line up,
Yeah.
I don't know, because I think they got a couple of guys on the interior that they feel good about coming back, and Jackson Powers Johnson, Marcus Harper. There's some younger faces there that look like they could be impact guys as interior guys. You look outside, Josh Connerly's a really, really, really high level guy at tackle. Stephen Jones has played a lot of football. So, there's probably 9 guys that could play regularly. Who
good.
gets the first rep, I don't know. But, if a guy like Angilau, I mean, he's got an injury history. If he can stay healthy, then you could see, maybe like all 3 of those transfers be factors.
Oh, is there somebody on that unit that separates himself, you think, as far as he's the guy?
I assume Connerly's the best pro
Connerly.
prospect.
Okay.
I mean, he's a really, really elite player. But Cornelius, I think, is I think he was a small school guy who, when he went in the portal and some big schools started seeing him, people suddenly were like, whoa, who's this guy? So but yeah, I think Josh Connerly,
Okay.
from what I understand, is probably the guy who's going to be drawing the most draft buzz, maybe after this year, if things play out how we think they are.
Okay. Let's move on down to the defense. And the defensive front sure looks talented. And I mean, Dorless, he's a familiar name. And they bring in Birch. Wow, what a hit in the transfer portal to get Jordan Birch to come from South Carolina.
He just did media after practice yesterday, and to see a man who's, I don't know what we list about, like 6'6", 290 or something like that. I mean, it's just to have somebody like that walk up to you. It's on the practice field. it's all in context. The big guys all kind of just look big.
Yeah.
To have somebody that big just walk by is,
Right.
yeah, it puts it in a different perspective. He's an immense physical talent, and I think coaches are pushing him really hard because I think they know the ceiling's really high with him. And if he can kind of put in the work to reach it, he could be a really, really high level player.
Yeah, well, as we know, there's been some really talented players that have come from the front there at Oregon in recent years. So a couple more possibly on the way. And then the nose tackle, he missed all season, Popo?
Popo Aumavae, yeah, he was hurt last season. I mean, he's a kid. Just the way, like Nishad Strother, one of the transfers on the interior offensive line, the way to hear him talk about practicing against Popo. I mean, he literally said he's never seen a guy that size move the way Popo does. But staying healthy has always been kind of the thing for him. And Taki Taimani's another guy that can play nose. Same thing. When you get big guys that have the potential to move really explosively, that can take its toll. So I think both those guys are if they can just stay healthy, can really be forces. I mean, can really, really be impact players. And yeah, you look at Dorless, you look at a Casey Rogers, who's just relentless in terms of his motor. Keon Ware-Hudson's a guy who has provided depth for this group in the past. And then the true freshman group, just the way they profile physically. I mean, it's very clear. A guy like Dan Lanning comes in from the SEC and says, I know what defensive linemen are supposed to look like. We're going to go get some. And this freshman class kind of certainly profiles that way, at least, physical from the physical measurable standpoint.
I'm counting 4, 7, 8, 9 freshmen that will be playing up front for Oregon, just like you mentioned. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah,
of freshmen.
Yeah, we'll see if they all play.
How many?
Like a Mateo Uiagalelei, like I assume he'll probably be a factor in the pass rush. Maybe one or two of those defensive linemen. A couple of them were here. Johnny Bones was here in the spring. Maybe he has a leg up on being a rotation guy. But I think you feel like there's enough veterans back that you might not need a bunch of those young guys to play. But again, just to watch out to the practice field and just they all pass the eyeball test. That's for sure.
And the kid Mateo, who has a very similar last name to the former
That's DJ's younger brother.
Is okay.
Yeah.
How could it not be, right? So okay, so he was
they're rivals now. That's
that's interesting. Yeah,
flavor to the Oregon State series for sure.
Right. Okay, and I've heard he is like one of your top recruits. So.
No doubt about it. In terms of if you were talking to the rivals guys, I'm sure that was a guy that they would have spotlighted.
Okay.
I mean, that was in terms of recruiting rankings. I can't quote it off the top of my head, but yeah, he was highly sought after, and he looks like a pretty elite pass rusher.
Iowa transfer comes in at linebacker. Couple of transfers.
Justin Jacobs.
Yes.
So, he was here in the spring, so that was really good. Connor Soule, another guy who came in as a transfer, was here in the spring. Jeff Bassa and Jamal Hill are two guys who started their careers as safeties. So really athletic guys who've moved down to play linebacker. And then Devin Jackson's a kid who came in as a linebacker, but just really, really athletic. And, that's a position when Dan Lanning was hired and you saw the success that linebackers had, particularly in his Georgia defenses. And I think last year, when Noah Sewell was coming back and Justin Flo was coming back, it was like, oh, gosh, you combine that kind of personnel, that talent, with the system that Lanning runs, and those guys are going to have huge years. And, for whatever reason, they weren't as productive as, Sewell didn't put up quite the same numbers as he had the year before. Flo was, had a kind of an inconsistent season. He ended up transferring out. But I think no small part of that is we've heard, up and down the line defensively, we've heard from guys talking about how much more comfortable they feel in Lanning's system in year
that makes
two.
sense.
That it just it really did take some time to learn.
Yep.
And the comfort level guys are expressing now is just different. And so I think you look at guys like Bassa and Hill and Jackson and Jacobs, who are, now particularly with like Bossa and Hill and Jackson, who are in their second year in this system and are the kind of athletes that they are, even though there's some new faces that are going to need to play, some important roles in that inside linebacker group. There's some, reasons for optimism that with their comfort level combined with their physical skills, that they could be able to step into those roles successfully.
Lanning. So does he? I know there's a coordinator, of course, on the team, but does he run the defense?
No, I think Tosh Lupoy. I mean, he's the coordinator. I mean,
Okay.
It's his defense, but I think Coach Lanning's resume it speaks for itself. And I'm not in their defensive meetings, but
So,
I would think that he has a fair amount of input, at least when asked.
Yeah, I remember.
For sure. I mean, the way the defensive players talk about the reverence they have for Lanning, it's clear his fingerprints are on this defense for sure.
Yeah, I know how tough it can be, especially when you're young, to relinquish those duties. It's always interesting when an offensive coach turns into a head coach. It's almost like if he remains the play caller and so forth, nobody seems to miss a beat. But if the defensive guy does it, for some reason, it's just a little bit different. It's like, well, shouldn't he
That's
just
a great
be worried
point.
about being a head coach and not, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've never thought about that, but I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That, when a play caller takes over as head coach, it's like there's a fear that he'll stop calling plays.
Yeah.
Like, no, you still want to do that, right?
That's why you got hired in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
A defensive guy is just not granted that same grace.
Yeah.
And I never considered that, but I think you're absolutely right.
All right. The secondary, and all I see is orange in the secondary as far as starters. Yeah. So does that mean it's possible that all 5 top DBs could be new? Including Martin Cole as a freshman?
Cole Martin.
Cole Martin, excuse me.
I can't remember exactly who all the 5 starters were, but yeah, Christian Gonzalez is gone.
Oh,
Bennett
that's
Williams
huge. Yeah.
is gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's certainly some returning guys in the mix. Triquez Bridges has played a lot of football here. Dante Manning was one of those 5-star recruits that I think kind of if he's gonna step into that role, the time is now.
Yep.
Jalil Florence is a guy who was a really highly regarded recruit who I think this staff thinks has a bright future and could be ready to realize that as soon as this year. But yeah, I mean, from Kyrie Jackson to Tysheem Johnson to Nico Reed to Evan Williams, the portal bore a lot of fruit for the secondary this year. And yeah, I think there's no doubt, there's expectation those guys are going to play some roles. I mean, safeties, Brian Addison has played a lot of football here. Steve Stevens is a really highly regarded leader here. But yeah, I mean, you target certain positions in the portal for a reason, and there's, just watching practice, those guys have a lot of talent for sure. Some of those new faces.
Yeah, Evans, the one that I know from Fresno State. He's a very talented kid. So, and then Cole Martin is potentially going to get a lot of playing time. That would be pretty impressive for a freshman to be. Again, it's just a depth chart. It's not the team depth chart, but to see a freshman potentially as a starter, that says a lot.
Yeah, I think there's a couple guys he'd have to beat out for that nickel spot. I mean, Florence can play nickel. Nico Reed can play nickel. Kamari Terrell can play nickel. There's no doubt Martin has shown some flashes since he got here. And his dad's the cornerbacks coach, so he's got good bloodlines.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a couple of those guys on the team.
All right.
Tatum Tuioti, true freshman, outside linebacker. His dad is the D-line coach. So there's a couple of legacies on this team, which is pretty fun because it's fun to see, assistant coaches who are also proud dads kind of balancing wearing those 2 hats. So
college football.
Yeah, neither guy technically plays for his dad, but they're both on the same side of the ball and kind of in the same position group. So that's pretty fun. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of options. It's kind of like the offensive line. They're trying a lot of guys in different positions because they want that versatility, but they're also, you hear offensive line coaches talking about all the time. You want the best 5 not necessarily
Yep.
the 5 best,
Yep.
but the best 5 that fit together. I think it's the same thing in the secondary. You know, that you want the best 5 that fit. You know, the quintet that plays together the best and fits the best. You know, it might not necessarily be the 5 best guys on paper,
Sure.
just because of the way things work out. But so that's we've got a big scrimmage coming up Saturday. I mean, there's still some really prime evaluation time left before they start honing in on a true depth chart in the next couple of weeks.
Well, to have Bo Nix as quarterback, that will.
I think he's if there's anybody who's safe, Bo might be safe.
I think that he is going to make sure he gets that secondary ready. So.
Absolutely, yeah, no doubt.
I'll test you guys.
No, they go good on good a lot. So he's facing all those guys for sure.
And then, is it possible to have the team will have a freshman punter?
Oh, sure, yeah. I think that's it's a competitive battle as there is on the team right now.
Okay.
Freshman came in, transfer came in, got one returning kid, and it was basically from what was basically like a revolving door last year. So
okay.
Wide open. You know, as opposed to place kicker where Camden Lewis is back and has made some big kicks, and I think they feel really, really confident in him.
Before I let you go, the schedule. So the non-conference, the big one is at Texas Tech. So that's a nice test. Texas Tech is I haven't looked at them completely this year, but they were on the rise last year, so that could be a good road test. But other than that, if they can win that one, then Oregon could and should start off 5-0 as long as nothing goes wrong. But then things get really tough towards the second half of the schedule with road games at Washington and Utah. Even though they do end with 2 of their last 3 at home and big ones against USC and Oregon State. That's as big as you can get. I'm sure the place is going to be rocking. You got a potential Heisman and #1 draft pick coming to town. And, of course, the Civil War in the last Pac-12 Civil War matchup. That's going to be an incredible couple of last home games.
Yeah, the first home game in conference play is Colorado. Getting
yeah, there you go.
Coach
season
Prime's
tickets.
First conference game. So it should be a really fun year, and I think you're right. There's some cautious optimism that by the time you get into, particularly like towards that Husky game, hopefully you're off to a really good start. But that Texas Tech game feels like a real kind of show me game, I think, for both teams. I think, just what I'm reading, generally about Texas Tech. I mean, I think, there's a sense that could be a team that's primed for a really good year. And, if Tyler Shuck, he played here. Their quarterback is a guy who played here. So he would have been a backup, I think, on that 19 team, whose first game was against Auburn.
Was
so it's
Bo
possible
playing?
and Bo, but that was Bo's first game. So I want to check. It's possible that we had a game 4 years ago that was Bo Nix on one side and Tyler on the other, and that'll switch. Yeah.
Hey, we're in the new era of college football.
Exactly. That's the new. Yeah, that's the way of things now.
And last question: give me a breakout player on both sides of the ball. Someone that you think could be a household name that's not a household name at this point in time.
All right, off the top of my head, well, I think Josh Conerly, just based on his pro potential, offensively, going to be a guy that, kind of why would you have heard about an offensive lineman?
Yeah, sure. That's a good
one.
one.
Year. But, as this season progresses and sort of draft buzz starts to build, I think that's a name people are going to have heard.
Okay.
I do think, one or both of those other running backs that are back, Noah Winnington or Jordan James, could be guys that, it's an and situation with Bucky, not, it's Bucky and these other really talented guys, not Bucky and, a lack of awareness about who the other guys are. Because I think those are some good players. And anybody that doesn't know Tez Johnson, I assume they will. Defensively,
defensively is interesting.
I've really enjoyed watching Devin Jackson at linebacker this preseason, but there are a lot of options there. I'm not sure how much run he's going to get. Mateo Uyunglele could be a guy who, even if he's used kind of situationally. That could be a guy who finishes the year with double-digit sacks, and
Wow.
you know, everybody knows about DJ now, and suddenly we could be talking about 3 or 4 months, and
We know
yeah,
more about
you
him
know,
than his brother. Yeah.
yeah, he's not DJ's little brother anymore.
That's right.
Yeah, DJ is Mateo's big brother. Yeah,
Well, if he has that type of season and his
who
brother has
knows?
that type
Yeah,
wow.
but DJ could be DJ set up to have a heck of a year too.
Yeah.
So
I hope
yeah,
so. That'd be
again,
great.
it's going to make that Oregon State game, you know, just one more reason that Oregon State game this year should be really, really fun.
Right? Like if it needs another reason. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Rob, great job as always. I really appreciate it. And hey, you know what? If it's a huge season at Oregon, and it's got the potential to be, maybe we'll get lucky, or I'll get lucky, of course, and have the opportunity to talk to you again before it's all over.
Hey, if that's what it takes, I'd like nothing more.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob.
Absolutely. Have a good one.